Hi everyone, I wanted to explore the use of 10% and 1% in your estimation. I wanted to show you a shortcut so this way you're not bogged down with a lot of calculations. So we're just going to jump right into it. So for example, let's say that we have a question like, what is 80% of, let's see here, 69? If we're going to go ahead and do estimation, one thing that we might want to do is work with a nicer number than 69. So you would want to find a number that's closer. Okay. So in this case, I would say, let's say instead of 69, let's work with 70 here. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take this 80% and I'm going to change it. I'm going to say that this is 8 groups of 10%. In other words, if we were going to go ahead and explain this, 8 groups of 10% really means 10% plus 10% plus 10% plus 10%, and so on until we've added it onto itself 8 times. So the reason why I'm picking 10% here is because it's a quick calculation. We don't have to default to the calculator. We probably, once we get used to this, don't even have to really write it down. We can do this mentally. One other thing that I do want to note for you is that the word of, it means the same thing as multiplication. So we're going to do 10% times 70. And actually, whenever you multiply 10% times 70, what you are essentially doing here is you will locate the decimal point on 70, which is going to be passed to 0, and we're going to move the decimal point to the left 1. So 10% times 70 is equal to 7. Okay. If you need some further explanation, let me go ahead and do a quick aside for you. 10%, this is the same thing as 10 over 100, which reduces down to 1/10. Okay. So if we rewrite what we have above here, instead of 10%, we would say 1/10 times 70. I'm going to go ahead and write that over 1 so that I can see clearly everything that I have here. And then recall that when you multiply fractions, you multiply the numerators, and then you multiply the denominators. This would be equal to 70 over 10, and this would reduce down to 7. So it's a quick, what I showed you above is a quick cheat sheet in a sense. So getting back to this problem, that I'm going to go ahead and finish off in green, since I know that 10% of 70 is equal to 7, then we can really say that 80% is 8 groupings of this 10% of 70. So that means that I can just do 8 times 7, and that's going to be equal to 56. So what I am saying is 80% of 70 is 56. If you don't believe me, go ahead and jump onto your calculator and double check. We can also do this by hand to verify that what I am telling you is correct. If you were to go back to the original problem and say, if we looked at 80% of 70, well, then we can actually say that this is 70 times 0.8. 8 times 0 is 0. 8 times 7 is 56. And then since we have one digit after a decimal place, we would put the decimal, we would move the decimal in one place. And lo and behold, we get 56.0, or the same thing, which is 56. Okay. So this is kind of a nice cheat sheet. So again, let me show you a different one, and then I will show you one with 1%. So say we want to find out 40% of, say, 45. I'm actually going to go ahead and leave it as is. I'm not going to round this up or down. Plus, the fact that 45 is in the middle of 40 and 50, it kind of puts you in this awkward position of, do you round down or do you round up? Because either way, you're making a big jump down or you're making a big jump up. So I'm going to leave it at 45. So again, I'm going to do my cheat sheet and say, okay, I'm going to leave this at 45, but instead of 40%, I'm just going to figure out what 10% is. And again, I can totally cheat, locate the decimal point, which is going to be after the 5, and just move it in 1. So 10% of 45 is 4.5. But I want to know 40%. I know 10%, so what I essentially have to do then is just multiply this 4.5 by 4, and I will find that calculation. So I'm going to take my 4.5, times it by 4. 5 times 4 is 20, so put the 0 down and carry the 2. 4 times 4 is 16, plus 2 is 18. I have one digit after the decimal point, so I move the decimal point in 1. So we can say 40% of 45 is 18. So hopefully you're seeing that quick shorthand. I don't really have to show the full calculation. I didn't write out the multiplication. I really just kind of wrote the line and showed how the decimal gets moved in 1. So let's go ahead and look at this idea now applied to 1%. Okay. So if I want to know, for example, 1% of, say, 23. Okay. This is very similar to the idea of 10%. I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this. So say I change 1% into 1 over 100, because recall from class we said percent meant that certain number out of 100. And of means multiplication, and we have 23. Okay. If we were to go ahead and take care of this multiplication, we will get 23 out of 100. Well, 23 out of 100 comes out to 0.23. So what I want you to note here is that we went from 23 to 0.23. Those values didn't change, but what did change? And I know this is very Blue's Clues at the moment, but hopefully you're either muttering to yourself that, hopefully you are muttering to yourself or just thinking, I moved the decimal point in 2 places. So that's kind of interesting, right? So with 10%, you moved it in 1 space. With 1%, you moved it in 2 spaces. And it's actually all because of the fractions that you're seeing. So let me go ahead and lay this out. 10% is the same thing as 10 out of 100, which boils down to 1/10. I moved my decimal in 1 space. Okay, notice that I underlined that single 0 in the denominator. For 1%, this is the same thing as saying 1 out of 100. And I moved the decimal in 2 spaces when I did the shortcut. Ta-da! So maybe you are wondering, okay, so what if I was working with, say, 1/10 of a percent? Okay, sure. So this is 0.01 out of 100. And this is the same thing if we rewrite this as 1 out of 1,000. So hopefully you're thinking, so that must mean that I moved the decimal in 3 spaces in that case. And yes, you would be correct. So let me do one more problem with you with the 1%. And we're actually going to go ahead and make it pretty light. So let's say we do 1% of 30. Okay. So if we did 1% of 30, then we would go ahead and locate the decimal. And we can move this in 2 spaces. So 1% of 30 would be 3/10. So say I upped the problem's difficulty and say I want to know 7% of 30. Well, as previously noted above, I know that 1% is 3/10. So what I can actually do then, in order to find 7% of 30, would be to take my 3/10 here and just multiply it by 7. This would come out to 2.1. Okay. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope that it clarified some things, and I hope that this offers a quick tool that you can use in future courses and on your exam. If you do have any questions, please let me know.